I never imagined how a quiet night's drive could shift the rhythm of my life so dramatically. The air was thick with the scent of rainfall, a precursor to the tumult that lay just ahead. As I turned onto a quieter street, the flickering streetlights cast an eerie glow, illuminating the curves of the asphalt like shadows dancing in a dream. It was here that I spotted something unusual, a commotion at the corner of Fifth and Elm, where a crowd had gathered, their voices rising in a chorus of urgency and agitation. A sudden pang of curiosity pulled me closer. I parked my car and stepped out, drawn to the scene like a moth to a flame. What I encountered was a conflict between a group of protesters and a pair of officers whose stern faces mirrored the burgeoning tension. The protesters, armed with placards that demanded justice for a neighbor who had met with an untimely and questionable fate, stood their ground, their passion palpable. It was a familiar sight, echoing news reports I'd watched with a mix of dread and hope over the years. I was suddenly faced with the raw reality of my own indifference. How many times had I driven past similar scenes, safely encased in my car, convinced that it was all beyond my control? In that moment, the solitude in which I had cocooned myself began to shatter. My heart raced, and I felt the stirrings of an unfamiliar fear blended with the need to act. As voices clashed and sentiments erupted, I instinctively reached for my phone, the urge to document the moment striking me as both important and immediate. But something stopped me. The words of my mother echoed in my mind. Aisha, what will you do when it's your neighbor who needs you? When it's your voice that can make a difference? The weight of her words hung heavy in the air, forcing me to reconsider the narratives I had crafted around my life and the responsibilities that came with them. I was no longer just an observer. I was part of this community, bound by the ties of shared experience, pain, and ultimately, hope. Having spent much of my life advocating for those who felt powerless, it was time to become a voice amidst the cacophony rising before me. With a deep breath, I stepped forward, joining the fray. As I stood shoulder to shoulder with strangers who were quickly becoming allies, I felt my heart steady. It was as though the city, in all its complexity, was shaking me awake from a slumber of solitude. As chants erupted and calls for justice filled the air, I raised my voice, melding it with the crowds, striving to transform individual anguish into a collective roar. In that tumultuous space, I began to recognize the power we held when united. Though I began the evening as just another passerby, I recognized that I would walk away with newfound purpose, ready to reshape my narrative and embrace the courage to alter the rhythm of my life forever. It was around 11 p.m. when I decided to unwind, leaving behind my modest apartment nestled in a vibrant neighborhood where every street corner told a story of resilience and ambition. I had taken my car for a drive, a cherished routine that served as a refuge from the chaos of daily life. During these solitary moments, the world seemed to fade away, giving me space to reflect on the complex tapestry of my experiences as a woman of color, navigating a society still grappling with the heavy shadows of discrimination and prejudice. As I merged onto a busy street lined with eclectic storefronts and lively bars, each lit sign flickering like the hopes and fears I carried, I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, feeling the weight of my journey in every turn. The cool night air seeped through the cracked window, caressing my face and bringing with it a haunting clarity, reminding me of countless nights spent contemplating the battles fought and those yet to come. As I drove deeper into the night, the city's pulse resonated through the engine's hum, a reminder that life thrived all around me, despite the challenges I faced. Red and yellow lights danced in the rearview mirror, fascinating and fleeting like the opportunities that seemed to slip through my fingers. I turned the radio dial, searching for a station that would echo my sentiments, a song perhaps that could articulate the myriad of thoughts swirling in my mind. When I finally found a soulful melody, I let it wash over me, each note striking a chord within my heart, rekindling the fire to challenge and uplift myself and those who looked up to me. The song reminded me of the conversations I often had with my grandmother, a formidable woman whose strength had weathered storms I could barely comprehend. Her stories of struggle and triumph had been my guiding light, shaping my perspective and fueling my ambition. I could almost hear her voice now, urging me to push through the challenges, to find my voice amidst the din of the world that often wanted to drown me out, echoing the countless narratives she had shared with me that spurred my resilience during times of hardship. As I drove past a small park, I noticed a group of children playing under a flickering street lamp, their laughter cutting through the quiet night. It made me smile, a pure, innocent joy that felt like a balm to my weary soul. I thought of the younger generations, faces bright with potential, unfettered by the doubts that haunted so many of my contemporaries. There was beauty in their freedom, a reminder that perhaps my struggles could forge a path for theirs to be lighter. It was a testament to resilience. Even in a world filled with barriers, dreams persisted, blossoming in the unlikeliest of places. Turning down a quieter street, I found myself enveloped in the familiar scent of blooming jasmine, a sweet fragrance that always felt like home. I rolled down the window further, letting the scent fill the car, invoking memories of summer evenings spent with friends, laughing until our bellies hurt amidst a backdrop of playful banter and shared dreams. It was within these simple pleasures where I found solace. They grounded me amidst my swirling thoughts, a reminder of what truly mattered, echoing the warmth of connection I sought in my personal journey. Night after night, the drive had become more than just a journey. It was a pilgrimage of sorts, a path of self-discovery and reclamation. I wanted to stand tall, to carve out a space for myself and others in a world that often felt hostile. Every mile driven was a testament to my existence and my refusal to be silenced, a declaration that I would not only survive, but thrive. The trip would end soon, but the impact it had on my heart lingered like the fading stars in the dawn, a constant reminder to chase the dreams that burned bright within me. Without warning, the flashing blue lights appeared in my rearview mirror, cutting through the lingering twilight like a knife. My heart skipped a beat, pounding in my chest as a rush of adrenaline surged through my veins. "Not tonight," I silently pleaded, the familiar waves of anxiety crashing over me. Was this the beginning of yet another excruciating encounter? Or could it be a mere misunderstanding, a momentary lapse in judgment? The uncertainties tangled in my mind like a web, each thought spiraling further into a vortex of apprehension. I pulled over to the side of the road with measured calm, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as I fought to steady my racing thoughts. Beneath my composed exterior, however, I was a whirlwind of emotions, fear and dread swirling in a tempest, an ominous reminder of past experiences that felt all too close for comfort. The weight of each moment seemed to stretch out like an eternity as I braced for whatever lay ahead, hoping fervently that this time would be different. Moments later, the unmistakable sound of a police car's engine filled the silence, its lights flashing ominously in the rearview mirror. Anxiously, I watched as it pulled up behind me, the metallic clink of the door echoing in the stillness of the evening. An officer emerged, tall and imposing, his sturdy frame silhouetted against the glaring headlights. He was a white man with a stern, unmoving expression that conveyed both authority and an unsettling air of detachment. My heart raced, a cacophony of apprehension drumming in my ears as I prepared myself for our encounter. My mind flashing back to tumultuous accounts from social media and the hushed warnings of friends about the unpredictability of such situations. "Good evening, ma'am," he said in a clipped tone as he approached, each word deliberate and carefully measured, amplifying the tension in the air. "License and registration, please." My pulse quickened. The protocol felt obligatory, but the weight of his gaze felt as heavy as lead, amplifying every fear I harbored. My hand trembled as I retrieved my documents from the glove compartment, the cool metal of the latch almost a comfort against the chaos brewing inside me. Each motion felt exaggerated, as if I were moving in slow motion within a scene meticulously crafted to amplify my anxiety. I could hear the faint rustle of the night air outside, the distant hum of traffic, and the incessant drum of my heart echoing in my ears. I tried to maintain my composure, desperately reminding myself to breathe and to appear calm, even as panic threatened to swell into a tidal wave. "Here you go, officer," I replied, my voice steadying itself through sheer force of will, though my insides twisted like a knot, each word measured like a lifeline thrown across the abyss of this encounter. I avoided his gaze, focusing instead on the flickering headlights of passing cars, momentarily drawn into the rhythm of their movement, as if their fleeting nature could somehow provide an escape from this mounting unease. The officer studied my papers for a long, tension-filled minute, his brow furrowed in concentration as if he were deciphering a complicated puzzle. "Do you know why I stopped you tonight?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with an authority that pierced the stillness of the night, glancing at me with an expression that seemed to slice through the darkness, a subtle reminder of the power dynamics at play. His eyes held a mixture of scrutiny and impatience, making the chill in the air feel even sharper as it wrapped around my heart with each passing second. "I'm not sure, officer. I haven't done anything wrong," I said softly, my words tinged with both uncertainty and earnestness. My heart raced as I felt the weight of his gaze, a mixture of authority and suspicion that hung in the air like the heavy fog settling around us. I wished I could convey the sincerity of my intentions, the truth of my innocence, but every syllable seemed inadequate beneath the scrutinizing eyes of the law. I thought of the road I had just navigated, familiar yet now fraught with tension, and the stories of others who had walked this tightrope before me. In that moment, the stakes felt impossibly high. With every breath, I grappled with the implications of being misunderstood, of being misjudged. What if my words fell flat and turned into more questions instead of providing clarity? I could only hope that honesty might bridge the chasm between my reality and the officer's growing skepticism. He leaned in closer, his voice lowering. "There have been a few complaints about erratic driving in this area. Just answer a few questions. It's a formality, I assure you." As Jack shifted uncomfortably on his feet, he nodded slowly, unsure of where this was heading. "What kind of complaints?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The officer pulled out a small notebook, flipping through the pages before focusing back on him. "Mainly about sudden stops and swerving sharply without apparent reason. We've even received reports of people nearly losing control. Is there something you'd like to tell me?" The officer's eyes narrowed slightly, implying he had seen enough to be suspicious. Jack glanced around, noticing other passers-by starting to take notice of the interaction. "Well, I'm just delivering newspapers at this hour. Sometimes it can get pretty dark, and I'm still getting used to the route," he stammered, his heart racing. The officer leaned back slightly, observing him, the muscles in his jaw visibly tightening. "You understand that the safety of the community is at risk here, right?" "We can't have reckless driving going unchecked," he replied, his voice still low but authoritative. "Of course, officers, officer. I would never intentionally put anyone in danger," Jack replied, eager to maintain his composure. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Maybe the complaints came from people not used to seeing someone out here so early. The officer contemplated this for a moment, tapping his pen on the notebook. "Perhaps, but we can't take chances. Tell me, have you noticed anything unusual while you've been on your route? Any other cars or individuals acting strangely?" "Now that you mention it," Jack said, recalling a figure he saw near the park entrance last week. "There was a guy loitering by the newspaper stand, and he didn't seem right. Just standing there, staring. I thought it was just my imagination, but—" The officer jotted down notes, his brow furrowing. "Did he say anything to you?" "No, he just kept watching," Jack replied, a shiver running down his spine as the memory replayed in his mind like a broken record. He'd felt uncomfortable at the time, but brushed it off as paranoia. The officer looked up from his pad, his expression firm. "That's indeed concerning. If you see him again, or if anything else happens, you need to report it. We can't have that sort of person lingering around, especially if it's coinciding with the erratic driving. It might be linked, and Bert." Jack nodded, feeling the weight of the responsibility settle on his shoulders. "I will want to Sorna. I promise to keep an eye out." The officer straightened, slipping his notebook back into his pocket. "Just be careful, okay? If you're not certain about a driver's behavior, keep your distance." "Thank you, I appreciate that," Jack replied, relief washing over him as the officer stepped back, allowing him to leave. As he walked away, Jack felt a mix of anxiety and determination swirling within him. He needed to fulfill his job while ensuring the safety of the neighborhood. But now he understood that he was also part of a larger puzzle, one that he had noticed but had been too distracted to solve. With a newfound sense of purpose, he resolved to be more vigilant during his rounds, to not only deliver newspapers, but also to protect the community he had come to call home. At that moment, I felt the sting of a bias that had been ingrained in so many lives around me, a bitter echo of countless encounters and experiences that told me all too well how the world often perceived individuals like me. I could almost hear the whispers of history, the deep-seated prejudices that had sculpted the society I navigated daily. My skin color, a simple trait that should be inconsequential, carried the weight of societal judgments and expectations that often felt as heavy as lead. As I stood there, a kaleidoscope of emotions swirled within me: frustration, anger, and a profound sadness for all those who had walked this path before me, their voices silenced in the cacophony of unfairness. The silence that ensued was deafening, a thick wall separating my reality from the objective reasoning that others seemed to possess so effortlessly. Within this silence lay a multitude of voices, each one resonating with the painful truth that echoed softly in my mind. This is never about you. It was a reminder that in the eyes of many, the essence of my experiences could be overshadowed by preconceived notions that diminished my existence to mere stereotypes. In that critical moment, I longed not just to be seen, but to be truly understood, an acknowledgement that my life, my struggles, and my dignity were valid in a world determined to make me invisible. Officer, I assure you, I was driving with the utmost caution and attentiveness, I said, my voice striving for a calm firmness, despite the doubt swirling in my mind. This neighborhood is my home. I know these streets better than anyone, each corner etched in my memory and each pothole familiar like an old friend. I've driven this route countless times, always mindful of my surroundings and the lives within this vibrant community. He arched an eyebrow. That may be so, but we have to follow protocol. Please remain in your vehicle while I run your information. He turned on his flashlight and scanned the area, the beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. The weight of the situation hung in the air, palpable and thick. A low hum from the nearby generator was the only sound, punctuated by the distant rustle of leaves. I'll only be a moment, he added, his voice softer now, almost soothing. The driver shifted nervously in their seat, glancing out the window as the officer stepped away. Shadows danced along the roadside, and the yellow glow of the patrol car's lights flickered against the trees. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Her heart pounded as she replayed the events of the past hour in her mind. A frantic rush, a wrong turn, and now this. Seconds felt like minutes as she watched the officer fumble with his clipboard and pen, his brows furrowed in concentration. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life, buzzing with static in the indistinct chatter of dispatch. He leaned closer to the vehicle, catching snippets of conversation about a nearby accident, the urgency palpable even from where she sat. Just a routine check, she whispered to herself, though the words felt hollow. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Glancing in the rearview mirror, she caught a glimpse of the forest behind her, each tree looming ominously, as if they were witnesses to her plight. With the officer still at a distance, she found herself wondering how long he would take. What if he sensed her unease? What if he started asking questions that she didn't know how to answer? A knot tightened in her stomach. After what felt like an eternity, the officer returned, clipboard in hand. I appreciate your patience, he said, but his eyes darted back toward the road. Can I ask where you're headed tonight? Just passing through, she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. I got a bit lost. GPS issues. His suspicious gaze lingered a moment longer before he jotted down her response. Step out of the vehicle, please, he instructed, and her breath caught. Is that necessary, she stammered, her mind racing. But the officer's expression remained unchanged as he nodded. Just standard procedure. I need to ensure everything is in order. Reluctantly, she unbuckled her seatbelt and opened the door, the cool night air rushing in. As she stepped onto the pavement, the gravity of the moment hit her like a wave. She couldn't shake the feeling that the night was about to unravel in ways she couldn't predict. The officer watched her closely, as if trying to gauge her truthfulness, while a distant noise, a siren perhaps, began to wail in the background, sending a chill down her spine. Dumb. As the minutes dragged on, I sat immobilized by a suffocating mix of fear, shame, and confusion that wrapped around me like a heavy cloak. In the stifling silence, a heavy blanket of anticipation wrapped around me, suffocating yet familiar. I found myself recalling vivid childhood memories, where my mother's proud voice would echo in my mind, urging me to be resilient. Her words a steadfast shield against a world often clouded with prejudice. Never let the world make you feel less than you are, she would say, her gaze unwavering, filled with unwavering belief in my potential. Yet now, under the unyielding glare of indifferent city lights that flickered like distant stars stolen from the night, I felt as if my very essence was being measured against a scale that was rigged from the start. As I shifted uncomfortably on the cold concrete, The ground beneath me felt like a metaphor for my own unstable footing in this daunting reality. Every honking horn and hurried footstep echoed through the alleyway, amplifying the palpable anxiety that settled in the pit of my stomach. I glanced at the stranger again, searching for a flicker of empathy in his narrowed eyes, but found only indifference. It was disheartening, the way our paths had crossed in such a stark manner, juxtaposing the warmth of familial bonds against the chill of societal expectations. The cacophony of the city raged on, a relentless tide that continued to push against the fragile dam of my composure. I closed my eyes momentarily, each breath a deliberate act, grounding me amidst the chaos. In that fleeting stillness, I pictured my mother beside me, her hand resting gently on my shoulder, whispering tales of our ancestors who had navigated far more dangerous waters. I could almost hear her laughter mingling with the distant sounds of traffic, a melody of defiance against despair. The stranger shifted his weight, and my heart raced as I braced myself for the worst. But instead of accusation, he offered a scrutiny that revealed a flicker of curiosity. Inexplicably, I felt a surge of defiance well up within me. Perhaps I was not entirely alone. Perhaps beneath the hard shell of urban anonymity, there still existed the potential for connection. I straightened my back, my spine aligning with the silent vow I made to myself then and there. I would not let my story be reduced to the judgments of others. With renewed determination, I took a step forward, my feet moving as if guided by an instinct that had been dormant for too long. My voice, when it finally emerged, was steadier than I anticipated. "Who I am cannot be contained by your perception," I declared, surprising even myself. The words resonated within the alley, a daunting echo that filled the spaces between us. The world rushed by, but in that moment I felt time slow down, settling into a cocoon of empowerment. The stranger blinked, his expression shifting from indifference to something akin to surprise. I flashed a small smile, bolstered by a wave of solidarity that surged through me. No longer just a reflection of others' biases, I was asserting my own narrative, refusing to be a mere footnote in someone else's story. The city lights seemed to shimmer more brightly then, as if acknowledging my revelation. Perhaps I was more than just a woman facing scrutiny. Perhaps I was a vessel for change, a catalyst for understanding that could ripple outward. As I stepped out of the shadows, the weight of anticipation transformed from a suffocating cloak into a powerful armor. More than just a journey of self-discovery, this was a collective awakening. I would carry my mother's legacy forward, not just for myself, but for all those who walk the invisible line between identity and acceptance. With every step, I knew I was no longer fraying at the edges. I was stitching together a new tapestry, vibrant and alive, ready to confront the world anew. After what felt like an eternity, the officer returned to my window, a heavy silence hanging in the air between us, thick as fog. His presence loomed larger than life, a stark reminder of the power dynamics at play, the badge, the uniform, the authority that could so easily shape my fate in this moment. "Ma'am, I see no immediate reason for further action," he said curtly, his tone devoid of warmth or empathy, betraying nothing of the internal debate he might have been having. It was the kind of statement that should have offered relief, yet it only deepened the knot of anxiety twisting in my stomach. "However, I need you to come with me to the station for additional questioning." His words hung in the air like an ominous cloud, casting shadows over my thoughts. The implication was clear. I was to become a statistic in a system that often prized compliance over justice. I felt the weight of his gaze, scrutinizing me not just as an individual, but as a vessel carrying the legacy of my mother's struggle for understanding and acceptance. In that moment, I wasn't just being pulled into a law enforcement process. I was being thrust into a larger narrative that questioned the lines of identity and belonging. Would I be able to articulate my truth, or would I succumb to the fears that clung to me like a second skin? Stunned by the sudden turn of events, I found my voice trembling as I managed to ask, "Why do I have to come with you? I haven't committed any crime." The weight of my question hung in the air, layered with disbelief and a frantic hope for clarity. How could this be happening? I wasn't a fugitive or a lawbreaker. I was simply a citizen trying to navigate the complexities of life. Each word spilled out, infused with the raw anxiety that coursed through me, echoing my desperation for recognition and justice. The reality of my situation began to settle in, a moment that felt surreal, as if caught in a theater production where the lights suddenly dimmed, leaving me exposed on a stage I never wished to be a part of. He replied, "It's just a precaution. Please step out of your vehicle and follow me." As she hesitated, glancing around the dimly lit parking lot, a sense of unease settled over her. The officer, standing tall and firm, gestured for her to comply. She stepped out, the cool night air wrapping around her like a clingy shroud. "What's going on?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fluttering in her stomach. "Cineworm." "Just routine," he assured her, though the seriousness in his eyes belied the casualness of his tone. "We received a report about suspicious activity in the area. I need to ask you a few questions." As he led her toward the patrol car parked a few feet away, a swirl of thoughts raced through her mind. Was she being targeted? The anxiety bubbled up as she glanced back at her car, which seemed so innocuous yet utterly vulnerable now. "I was just leaving a friend's house," she explained quickly, her heart pounding. "I have my ID right here." The officer nodded, his expression softening momentarily. "Just needs to verify a few things. It'll be over in no time." He took her ID, flipping it over before taking a step back. It was then that she noticed her surroundings. The shadows cast by the dim lights, the echo of distant laughter fading into silence. It was unsettling. She tried to focus on the officer, whose face was a mask of concentration. "Can you tell me if you saw anything unusual tonight? Any strange vehicles or people?" he asked, his pen poised over a small notebook. At first, she thought back to nothing untoward. But then her mind drifted to the figure she had seen lurking near the corner of the street earlier. "Actually, yes," she said slowly. "There was someone acting oddly by the old diner. They looked like they were watching cars." For a brief moment, the officer's attention sharpened, the hint of urgency creeping back into his demeanor. "Can you describe them?" Her throat felt dry as she recalled the encounter, her instincts bringing the image into vivid focus. They were wearing a dark hoodie, with their hands stuffed in their pockets. "I didn't see their face," she said, unsure of how much detail she could provide. "But it gave me the chills." The officer jotted down notes while asking her more questions, each response igniting a flicker of concern within her. The night's calmness had given way to an undercurrent of tension, wrapping both of them in an unspoken worry. Another unit arrived, lights flashing in a rhythmic dance, and she felt a strange camaraderie form with the officer as they stood together. Two strangers caught in the web of something larger than themselves. "Let's check the area," he finally said, gesturing to the squad car where his partner was already scanning the surroundings. "I'll need you to stay close." As they walked, a strange mix of fear and determination fueled her steps. She didn't know what they would find, but the sudden surge of adrenaline made her feel alive. Maybe they would catch the mysterious figure. Maybe this would turn from a tense predicament into a story she would tell with a nervous laugh one day. But until then, all she could do was stay alert and hope for the best. So, inside, I felt a torrent of emotions swirl around me like a tempest, each wave crashing against my resolve. Fear tinged with uncertainty, tangled with the adrenaline still thrumming through my veins, and I grappled with an internal debate that felt both weighty and paradoxical. I understood that compliance would likely be perceived as submission, a passive acceptance of the circumstances that had ensnared me in this unexpected turn of events. Yet on the other hand, exercising defiance could lead to outcomes far more severe than the current predicament. Conjuring up visions of unjust scrutiny and dire repercussions I was not prepared to face. With a resigned nod that felt almost like surrender, I locked my car, the metallic click echoing louder than the pounding of my heart. The cool night air hit me like a splash of water, refreshing yet sobering as I stepped into the unknown. Each cautious footfall towards the officer's cruiser, parked haphazardly on the side of the road, felt heavy with the weight of my decision. The vehicle loomed before me, its dark, unyielding silhouette casting an ominous shadow against the stark streetlights. I couldn't shake the feeling that every move I made now could change the narrative of this night, shaping it into something I could either recount with a tremor of fear or with a sense of victory in the future. As I approached the cruiser, the officer inside looked up, his expression inscrutable. He wore a navy blue uniform that contrasted sharply with the glimmering badge pinned to his chest. I could see his eyes narrowing, not in suspicion, but in an effort to evaluate my demeanor. Had I been in his position, would I have responded the same way? What questions would he have for me? Taking a deep breath, I straightened my shoulders and closed the distance. The night was eerily quiet, the only sounds coming from the distant hum of traffic and the rustle of leaves swaying in the wind. I couldn't help but feel as if the universe was holding its breath, waiting for the unfolding of this moment. My stomach fluttered, not just with nervousness, but with a deluge of possibilities. Each heartbeat rang in my ears like a drum, urging me forward. Cool. Evening, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The officer recognized the tentative note in my voice, tilting his head slightly in acknowledgement. I wasn't just a figure in the dark. I was a story waiting to be told. I saw your lights and thought I should check if everything was all right. A statement that didn't quite mask the edge of uncertainty lacing my words. He regarded me for a moment, his keen gaze assessing every detail from my scuffed shoes to the mud-streaked hem of my jeans. Said he just a routine stop, he replied, his tone steady, but there was a hint of curiosity in his voice that seemed to invite me to elaborate. My instinct was to retreat into silence, but something pushed me to share. To open the door to my truth. I was involved in a minor accident earlier, I admitted, my lips forming the words before my brain could process the weight of them. The officer nodded, not startled by my confession, but instead his gaze softened. Sudru, you okay? His voice carried a warmth that momentarily melted away the chill that gripped me. Yeah, I think so, I replied. But the reality of my emotional state was a different story altogether. Beneath my bravado lay a tumult of confusion, regret, and fear of what could have been. I was still piecing together the fragments of the incident, desperately trying to ignore the vivid images of metal crunching and glass shattering that replayed in my mind. Well, accidents happen, he said, and I sensed a camaraderie in his words. There was a stillness between us, a shared understanding that nestled its way into the darkness around us. Sudanan, do you want me to call someone for you? The offer hung in the air like an unspoken lifeline. But before I could respond, the sudden wail of sirens tore through the stillness, blaring from a distance and pulling my focus away. The officer's demeanor shifted. He was a man of duty, a protector of the night. Stay right here, he instructed, his voice sharp as he turned towards the cruiser, ready to face whatever chaos awaited. As I stood there watching him, I couldn't help but feel a strange camaraderie blooming in my chest, a shared fight against the unpredictable nature of our choices. This night, I realized, was not just about the accident, but an awakening of sorts. I was standing at a crossroad, on the brink of choosing whether to step back into the shadows of fear or to walk boldly into the light of change. Once inside the police car, the tension grew palpable, wrapping around me like a thick fog that obscured my thoughts. The world outside seemed to fade into an indistinct blur, with the rhythmic thrum of the engine punctuating the suffocating silence. All that remained was the claustrophobic confines of the vehicle and the cold, professional detachment of the officer behind the wheel, who barely glanced my way. Every minute detail of the car became amplified in my mind, the scent of worn leather mingling with the faint aroma of fast food, the soft crackling of the radio as it flickered to life and then fell silent again, and the steady beat of my heart that seemed to echo in the stillness. We drove in silence for several blocks, the city outside morphing into a series of fleeting shadows and blurs, until we reached a small, nondescript police station nestled between imposing skyscrapers and dilapidated storefronts. This place, with its faded paint and flickering neon sign, was an inconspicuous fortress of authority that, despite its anonymity, carried the weight of countless similar encounters, each one a story of fear, hope, or regret etched into its very walls. Inside the station, I was led to a small interrogation room. The sterile space, lit by harsh, fluorescent lights, felt like a stage set up for a performance, which I was forced to be a part of. I sat in a hard wooden chair, noticing every detail, the persistent hum of the air conditioner, the peeling paint on the walls, and a clock that seemed determined to emphasize the sluggish passage of time. The door swung open, and the same officer reappeared, his face no longer hidden behind the facade of an imposing uniform, but instead unmoved by the gravity of the situation. He carried a file, thick and dog-eared, as if it had endured countless interrogations itself. You do know why you're here, don't you? He prompted, his eyes narrowing slightly. I nodded, trying to gather my thoughts. A witness reported seeing you near the site of the incident. The weight of those words pressed down on me, a suffocating shroud that made it hard to breathe. Memories of flashing lights, frantic voices, and the acrid smell of smoke flooded my mind. I had been there, yes, but merely by chance, a hapless bystander caught in a tempest of chaos. Look, I finally managed to say, my voice cracking under the strain. I didn't do anything. I just happened to be passing by. The officer leaned forward, his fingers touching the table deliberately, as if weighing the significance of my words. There was a darkness in his gaze that hinted at his skepticism, and I felt the desperate need to prove my innocence building inside me like a coiled spring. Then help me understand, he replied, crossing his arms. We have CCTV footage. You were there for a significant duration. What were you doing? Panic gripped me. Sweat trickled down the back of my neck, and I struggled to recall the details of that night. The seconds twisted away in my memory like strands of smoke, elusive and haunting. As I searched for a coherent response, another memory forced itself to the forefront. An unfamiliar face, a sharp laugh, eyes that glinted with mischief. Had I seen something? No, I tried to convince myself, but doubts crept in. Perhaps I had witnessed more than I realized, and the thought of being entangled in something larger sent a shiver down my spine. I can't explain everything, I stammered, but I think I may have glimpsed who did it. The officer's expression flickered. Curiosity, hope. I wanted to believe it brought an opportunity for freedom. If you can provide a description, he started, but my heart raced, a wild drumbeat overshadowing the sterile set of the room. I can try, but it's blurry, I whispered, biting my lip. I was mostly focused on getting away. Focus now, he urged, uncrossing his arms and leaning closer. Every second counts. Help us find the truth. As I closed my eyes, the memories began to crystallize against the confusion, and a path forward shimmered in the darkness, beckoning me to take the leap into the unknown. Ma'am, I need to ask you some more questions for our records, he said, taking a seat across the table from me. His eyes did not meet mine. They scanned a notepad as if my answers would be filed away as mere data points. I took a deep breath and began to recount my recollection of the evening. Every movement, every sound from that fateful night came rushing back. I was driving along Main Street, heading home after a long day. I can't imagine I was driving erratically. I was simply lost in thought, reflecting on how hard it is to stay safe in this city. I'm aware that some people believe I'm suspicious simply because of how I look, and that scares me. The officer's pen paused. What do you mean by that? He interjected. I looked him straight in the eyes, mustering every ounce of courage. I'm a woman of color, officer. I know that for many, appearances alone sometimes prompt suspicion. I have been stopped before, under circumstances that were quite frankly demeaning. It's like I'm constantly under a microscope, judged before I even have a chance to prove myself. For a moment, a flicker of something, perhaps empathy, passed over his features, but it was quickly masked by professional detachment. This isn't about prejudice. We're just verifying some reports, he said dismissively. I couldn't help but feel the irony. Here I was, forced to justify my existence and my actions in a system that too often made assumptions based solely on the color of my skin. The reports might be about erratic driving, but I believe they're more about fear than fact. You must understand how unfair it feels to be treated this way. Like I'm a suspect in my own life simply because I exist in a society that has certain preconceived notions, I replied, my voice a mixture of sadness and determination. The tension in the small room was nearly suffocating. I could hear the steady ticking of the clock, each second marking both my endurance and the unyielding nature of the system I was confronting. Finally, after what felt like hours, the officer concluded the questioning. That will be all for now, ma'am. Please return to your vehicle, he instructed, as if dismissing me was the natural order of things. Stepping out into the cool night once more, I felt a mix of relief and despair. I sat in my car, replaying every word, every look exchanged. I couldn't escape the realization that no amount of explanation would ever undo the impression that I was different, undeserving of the dignity that every human being seeks. The city continued to throb with life around me, indifferent to the internal struggles I was enduring. I drove home in a daze, each turn of the steering wheel feeling heavier than the last, haunted by the thought that my skin, my very being, had marked me as less worthy in the eyes of someone who was supposed to protect and serve. The experience lingered in my mind like a dark cloud, casting a shadow over the vibrant city lights that flickered past my window, which just moments ago felt like a comforting backdrop to my life. As I navigated familiar streets, the vibrant pulse of the city felt increasingly alien, a grim reminder of the disparity between my existence and the ideals of safety and justice that I had once taken for granted. This incident encapsulated a microcosm of a larger societal failure, a poignant reminder that the structures we rely on to guarantee safety and justice were still deeply flawed. I couldn't help but consider the countless others who had faced similar indignities, their wounds unspoken yet profound, echoing the painful reality that, for many, the very systems created to protect us often perpetuate division and inequality. In conversations with friends, I met sympathetic nods and shared experiences, reaffirming what I had long suspected. My experience was not isolated. In conversation with friends, I was met with sympathetic nods and shared experiences, reaffirming what I had long suspected. My experience was not isolated. One evening, while discussing the incident with my close friend Marisol, I poured out my heart. It's as if every time I'm out in the world, I'm being measured against some invisible standard. Like the system is just waiting for me to slip up so it can call me out, I explained, tears welling in my eyes. Marisol's eyes filled with understanding. Aisha, this isn't your fault. This is the reality for so many of us. A constant battle against stereotypes and systemic injustice. But you have a way of turning pain into strength. You have to show them that our existence, our presence, is something to be proud of, not something to be feared. Her words settled into me, sparking a determination to transform my vulnerability into a force for change. I began to write about my experience, documenting not only the events of that night, but also the broader implications of systemic bias. I wrote long, impassioned letters to local media outlets, shared my story on social platforms, and even spoke at community centers about the ongoing struggle for equality and justice within our urban spaces. Slowly, I realized that the narrative of that traumatic night could be reclaimed and reshaped into something meaningful, a call to action for those who had been silenced and marginalized. I was not going to let fear dictate my existence. I was determined to transform my experience into a statement of resilience and hope. One afternoon, about a month after that fateful night, I received an invitation to speak at a local community forum on policing and social justice. The venue was a modest auditorium in the heart of the city, filled with community leaders, activists, and everyday citizens yearning for change. As I took the stage, I looked out at the sea of faces, each person a silent testament to the struggles I had endured. I began to speak, my voice trembling initially, but gaining strength with each word. Today I stand before you not just as a speaker, but as a survivor, a witness to the complexities of our justice system and the urgent need for reform. The events that transpired that night are forever etched in my memory, and they have propelled me to this moment, to share my story and advocate for those whose voices have been silenced. I noticed some nodding heads in the front row, and my heart swelled with a sense of unity. There was a palpable energy in the room, a sense of collective purpose. Together we can spark change. Together we can push for measures that not only hold law enforcement accountable, but also foster trust within our communities. As I spoke about the importance of community engagement and the necessity of dialogue between law enforcement and citizens, I could see the crowd leaning forward, hanging on my every word. I shared statistics that highlighted the disparities in treatment based on race and socioeconomic status, emphasizing that it wasn't just numbers. These were real lives affected by real policies. We need to look deeper, I urged, to recognize the systemic issues that create an environment where fear and mistrust prevail. Let's explore the root causes of violence, poverty, and discrimination. We must be willing to acknowledge our biases and confront uncomfortable truths. Start by educating yourselves, I replied, passionate conviction fueling my words. Learn about the history of policing in our neighborhoods, the policies that have shaped our cities, and the voices that have gone unheard, for understanding is the cornerstone of effecting meaningful change. Let this serve as a turning point, I implored. Let's transform our grief into action and our anger into advocacy. When the forum concluded, the air was charged with determination. I stepped off the stage, my heart racing, not just from the adrenaline of speaking, but from the realization that change was within our grasp. As I mingled with attendees afterward, I felt a sense of connection that transcended our individual struggles. We were united in a mission, driven by compassion and a desire for progress. And as I left the auditorium, I knew this was merely the beginning of a larger movement, one that would echo far beyond that single afternoon. I stand before you not just as a victim of an unjust system, but as a proud, defiant soul who refuses to be defined by another's prejudice, I declared. Every night as I drove through these streets, I was reminded that our skin, our presence, makes us easy targets for suspicion. But tonight I choose to reclaim that narrative. I choose to say that our lives matter, our voices matter, and that every instance of discrimination is a call for change. The room was quiet for a heartbeat before a spontaneous burst of applause filled the space. It was not just for me, it was for all of us who had ever felt diminished by the society we lived in. The conversation that followed was rich and transformative, with community leaders promising to review police protocols and demand transparency. Though the chasm of injustice was vast, that night, at least in that small auditorium, a seed of change had been sown. Later that evening, as I sat beneath the dim glow of a street lamp outside the forum, I reflected on the complex tapestry of emotions that wove themselves through my life. The pain of the traffic stop was undeniable, yet it had also opened a door to a deeper understanding of the systemic challenges we faced. I realized that the only true resolution lay not in a single encounter, but in our collective willingness to confront and dismantle the prejudices embedded in our institutions. In the weeks that followed, I became more active in local community groups dedicated to reforming law enforcement practices and advocating for the rights of marginalized individuals. Together, we organized town hall meetings, engaged in dialogue with city council members, and partnered with legal experts to file complaints and push for policy changes. Every meeting, every conversation was a small step toward a future where a woman's skin color would no longer dictate her treatment under the law. One chilly evening, as I was preparing to attend yet another community meeting, I found myself once again behind the wheel of my car. This time, however, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The memory of that long-ago traffic stop, with its raw emotional impact and its unwelcome implications, had transformed from a wound into a rallying cry. The city, with its chaotic beauty and hidden struggles, was now the backdrop for my resolve to stand up for justice. At the meeting, I shared my story again, this time as testimony from one among many, a call to dismantle the oppressive frameworks that allowed bias to seep into everyday life. The dialogue was fervent and unyielding. One of the officers present, a middle-aged man with cautious eyes, approached me after the meeting and said, "I'm sorry for what happened to you that night. I understand now that my previous approach was influenced by assumptions I didn't even realize I held. I promise to do better." His words, though simple, resonated deeply within me. They symbolized the possibility of change, the hope that even within an institution so steeped in tradition and prejudice, there was room for growth and learning. I replied, "Thank you." Acknowledging our shortcomings is the first step toward change. We all have to work together to build a system that values every human being, regardless of their appearance. Even as years passed, that night on the busy city street remained etched in my memory. It was a moment of profound personal violation, but also one of unexpected awakening. I realized that the struggles I faced were not just mine alone. They were shared by a community of individuals yearning for justice and equality. And with every conversation, every protest, every shared story, we chipped away, however slowly, at the monolith of systemic inequity. Looking back, I understand that moments of pain can be crucibles for transformation. The fear and humiliation I experienced that night became catalysts for a broader movement. They provided the harsh clarity of what needed to be changed in our society and propelled me to use my voice as an instrument of resilience. In the tireless work of community activism, I found solidarity, compassion, and most importantly, hope. A hope that one day our streets could be free of discriminatory practices, that every person would receive the respect and dignity they deserve regardless of the color of their skin. My journey was not an easy one. I encountered moments of despair when the weight of injustice seemed insurmountable, times when the scars of those encounters with authority would reopen with each minor provocation. Yet through it all, I clung to the conviction that our collective experiences, shared in truth and vulnerability, possess the power to heal and transform society. I learned that the path to justice was paved through empathy, persistence, and the unwavering willingness to challenge prejudice wherever it reared its head. One crisp winter night, as I drove along a familiar stretch of the city, I recalled the scent of rain on hot asphalt and the distant murmur of pedestrians navigating slick sidewalks. I thought of all the faces, both innocent and battle-worn, that populated those streets. I remembered the very day I was pulled over, and though the memory still stung, it no longer filled me solely with sorrow. Instead, it reminded me of the progress we had made, the conversations that had sparked reforms, and the solidarity that had blossomed within the community. I began documenting these thoughts in a journal, capturing the emotional cadence of living a life shaped by experiences at the intersection of race and authority. My journal became a testament to the realities of systemic injustice, a mosaic of personal pain and collective triumph. In these pages, I wrote scathing critiques of the policies that allowed prejudice to flourish, as well as hopeful musings on the day when equality would finally be more than just a distant dream. One entry read, "Tonight, as I listened to the distant hum of city traffic and watched reflections of neon lights dance on rain-slick surfaces, I felt that this city, bruised by decades of bias, was on the verge of transformation. Every act of discrimination, every story of pain, is a fuel for change. Our voices, once silenced by fear, now echo with the promise of justice." I eventually compiled these writings into a small booklet distributed at community centers and local libraries. It was a modest effort, but it sparked dialogue among readers, people who had never considered the intricacies of the relationship between law enforcement and communities of color. The booklet was shared on social media, discussed in community forums, and even referenced in local council meetings. In time, the conversation shifted from isolated incidents to a broader examination of systemic reform. Over time, I began collaborating with activist groups and legal advocacy organizations. We lobbied for mandatory bias training for officers, independent reviews of traffic stops, and the installation of body cameras to ensure transparency during all law enforcement encounters. Our efforts were met with resistance from some quarters, but the momentum we built was undeniable. Every small victory reaffirmed our belief that persistence in the face of adversity could eventually reshape the narrative of our city. One evening during a particularly heated council meeting, a passionate debate erupted. A senior council member, visibly agitated, declared, "We cannot continue to let personal bias guide our policing policies. Every innocent person who is stopped on a whim is a reminder of our collective failure to enact meaningful change." The room fell silent, the gravity of his words resonating deeply with everyone present. That night, as the meeting adjourned, I felt a sense of hope that our voices, nurtured by shared frustration, had begun to affect real political change. Even as progress was made in the public arena, healing from individual encounters took considerably longer. Slowly, the narrative that had once reduced me to a statistic, a woman pulled over at night because of the color of her skin, was being rewritten. I started receiving messages from strangers who expressed their gratitude for my courage in sharing my story. One email read, "Your words gave me hope when I was at my lowest. I now stand taller, knowing that I am not alone in this struggle." Such messages underscored the profound impact that individual acts of vulnerability could have on an entire community. Looking back on that fateful night, I now see it as a turning point, a painful yet necessary catalyst for a larger movement. It was an encounter that exposed the raw underbelly of a system built on bias, but it was also a moment that ignited the spark of transformation. I realized that until we confront the uncomfortable truths embedded within our institutions, society can never progress towards genuine equity. Today, when I drive along the same busy street, the neon lights seem to carry dual meanings, one of lingering memories of injustice, and another of the hope that change is possible. I still feel a flutter of apprehension at the sight of flashing lights in my mirror, but it is tempered by a conviction that I am part of a larger chorus demanding reform. Every day I choose to channel my experiences into advocacy, determined to ensure that my story, and those of countless others, contribute to a balanced social commentary. One where justice is not a privilege for a select few, but a right for everyone. In time, the dialogue between law enforcement and communities of color slowly evolved into conversations about reform, accountability, and empathy. There were still missteps along the way and occasional backslides, but incremental progress was visible. The system was not perfect, but it was increasingly influenced by voices like mine, a voice once silenced by fear, now amplified by resolve. I conclude my recollection with a message for anyone who has ever felt marginalized or unjustly targeted. Our worth is not defined by the biases of those in power. Every encounter, even the most painful, holds the potential to galvanize a movement for change. The fear that one experiences during a nocturnal traffic stop on a busy city street can transform into a beacon of light that guides us towards advocacy and systemic reform. As I pen these final thoughts, I am reminded that the struggle for justice is an ongoing journey, one that transcends individual moments of pain. It is a collective effort, a tapestry woven from the threads of personal experiences, community solidarity, and the unwavering desire for a world where every person is seen, heard, and respected. That night, when a white police officer pulled me over in what seemed an arbitrary act of control, I could not have foreseen the ripple effects that would follow. The tension in that moment served as both a reflection of our society's failings and as a call to action. I have learned that the resolution to such encounters does not lie solely in the individual confrontation, but in the communal willingness to acknowledge injustice and demand accountability. Now, as the city continues its ceaseless rhythm under the night sky, I drive with a renewed sense of purpose. I carry with me the lessons of that night, lessons about resilience, the power of our voices, and the importance of standing together against systemic inequity. In every mile I travel and every conversation I initiate, I honor the collective struggle for dignity and justice, knowing that change is inevitable when we dare to speak out. In the end, my story is not merely about a single traffic stop. It is a narrative of transformation, a journey from fear to resistance, from isolation to solidarity, from marginalization to empowerment. And as long as the echoes of that night reverberate in our hearts, we must continue to demand a society where every person, regardless of their skin color, is valued and protected by the very institutions meant to serve us all. This is my truth as I share it with you tonight. Our struggles, our voices, and our relentless pursuit of justice knit together the fabric of a more compassionate public discourse. May it serve as a reminder that the quest for equality is never in vain, and that even in the darkest moments, the promise of a brighter tomorrow shines through. As I close my eyes now, reflecting on the chaotic beauty of the city and the unyielding spirit of its inhabitants, I know that the path I walk is not solitary. It is paved by the hopes and sacrifices of many who came before me and carried forward with every step we take towards a society built on fairness and respect. The dim glow of that night has transformed into a guiding light, a symbol of the legacy we are creating and the change that lies ahead. And so, in the enduring words of truth and resilience, I say to every person who has ever felt diminished or alienated, let our stories be the seeds of revolution, our collective pain the mortar of solidarity, and our unified voices a clarion call for dignity, justice, and inclusion. For in our willingness to confront injustice and embrace our shared humanity, we pave the way for a future where discrimination is not the norm, but a relic of a past we have overcome. Tonight, as I drive on, the city whispers its secrets, and I listen, not merely as a victim, but as an advocate for change, ready to forge a path where the light of unity dispels the darkest shadows of prejudice. This is my story, a story of pain turned into power, of fear transformed into hope, and of a community's resolve to create a world defined not by the color of our skin, but by the strength of our shared humanity. May this narrative serve as both catharsis and a call to action, inspiring every soul who encounters it to stand up against injustice and actively participate in the creation of a more equitable society. Because when we speak our truth and refuse to accept a system designed to marginalize, we become the architects of change, one story, one conversation, one courageous act at a time. In the silent hum of the night, amid the swirling traffic and the pulse of the city's heartbeat, I find solace in the knowledge that my journey, fraught with trials, marred with injustice, yet illuminated by hope, is but one chapter in the larger narrative of a world ready to transform. And as I continue to write that story, I remain steadfast in the belief that our collective courage will one day render every night safe, every voice valued, and every human life celebrated equally. Thank you for listening to my truth.